Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today to discuss with us the fourth topic, financial disclosure systems for public officials and how they can help tackle corruption. I will not yet introduce our four panelists today. I first wanted to do a brief introduction of the topic to make sure we're all on the same page and what are the key issues that we want to discuss today in this panel. So probably you've heard about asset declarations by public officials, financial disclosures, wealth reporting, interest declarations. There's very different names. Each country calls it differently, but there's always the same underlying rationale. And it is a certain group of public officials, which is generally those that are elected in high-level positions or in higher risk positions because they are dealing with finances or procurement or budget, etc. That group of public officials must periodically submit information to a government authority about their income, their assets, their interests, their liabilities, etc. A lot of personal information. So the logic is very clear. It's very simple. So it is quite simple, but it is also very powerful. Declarations are one of the few anti-corruption tools that can help in prevention, detection, investigation, prosecution, and sanctioning of corrupt acts. And it doesn't stop there. It can also help in implementation of anti-money laundering systems because it can help with customer due diligence for the identification of politically exposed persons, and it can even bring some information on beneficial ownership. And it doesn't stop there. It also helps with asset tracing and asset recovery when there's a transnational aspect of corruption. And as if all of this was not enough, it can also help promote a culture of integrity, increase transparency, accountability, strengthen trust in public institutions, and the list goes on and on. I think you get the point. I don't think I need to continue saying which are the wonders of asset declarations. But the key thing is it can serve multiple purposes. For all of these good reasons, asset declarations have become a relevant topic in international anti-corruption discussions. And of course, in the implementation of the Fund's 2018 Enhanced Governance and Corruption Framework. It appears as part of our policy recommendations in surveillance, when it's relevant, of course. and it is also an area in which we've had conditionality in fund-supported programs. I was trying to count before this panel, and in the last 2 years, there were at least 13 structural benchmarks related to financial disclosure exclusively in fund-supported programs. So this is an important topic for us. So we talk about the good things, but also we need to discuss the other side of the coin. Despite the simple logic of asset declarations and its recognized importance to fight corruption, it has proven to be quite challenging for some countries to effectively implement disclosure systems. And by this challenging aspect, I don't mean passing a law. If you look at the World Bank data, there's 90% of the countries of the world which actually have legislation on asset declarations. So that is not really the part that is challenging. So what we really need to ask ourselves is how many of these countries passed a law to check a box in the anti-corruption efforts rhetoric, but with no real political will to use them? And how many of them have effectively implemented a system and empowered it? So let me give you an example to illustrate this very quickly. Many years ago, I was doing research on asset declarations, and I go to this country that was very proud of their system, and they thought it was very comprehensive. I will not name the country. So I said, okay, great, it's a comprehensive system. Can I please see your declaration form? I want to see what it is that public officials are declaring. And they give me one piece of paper with one line that says, please list your interests. This was a system that was focused in conflict of interest. As you know, systems can focus on conflict of interest, sometimes on illicit enrichment, sometimes on both. So hesitant of how this one-liner would work with public officials, I said, can you also share with me some declarations from public officials? I would like to see how they declare, what it is the information that they're putting. And so they gave me two. One of them was from a person that says, in one line, I have interests in the mining sector, period. The other one was a very long list of all the assets, all the interests, with the value, with the description, not only in the country but also abroad. The funny thing is, both of these public officials were complying. They were both submitting their asset declaration, but clearly one was more useful than the other to detect conflict of interest and potential illicit enrichment. So countries can do the same. Some tick a box, and others build effective and very empowered systems. And here today, we have 4 people that have been very engaged in empowering financial disclosure systems, and to also discuss a lot of the challenges that are associated with these systems and their implementation and how to make them effective. So now I will introduce our panelists. Today we have first, Guillaume Valette-Valla. I'm always afraid I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. He's a magistrate from France. He's the former Secretary General of the High Authority for Transparency in Public Life of France. And he is also, aside from all of these titles, he's the person that led a very important reform in France a few years ago. So he has a lot of hands-on experience on how to change an asset declaration system. Then we also have Silviu Popa. I'm not going in order, I'm sorry. Silviu Popa. He's the Secretary General of the National Integrity Agency of Romania, which is also called ANI. And he has been with ANI since 2008, which is basically when it was created, 11 years ago. So in all of these years, I know he has done a lot and seen a lot. Then we have Vitaliy Shabunin. He's the chairman of the board of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, also known as ANTAC, in Ukraine. And in the past 7 years, ANTAC has managed to develop and advocate for the adoption and control and implementation of key anti-corruption legislation in Ukraine. I know he's also very active. He'll tell us quite a few things. And last but not least, I have Emilia Berazategui, who is the Global Advocacy Coordinator for Transparency International, where she develops and implements strategic advocacy work. And she has also a strong commitment to the asset declaration topic, not only in TI, but also in her previous position in an NGO in Argentina called Poder Ciudadano. So I will start now asking a question to Guillaume so that we can start this conversation. Guillaume, based on the experience of France, what are your views on why countries should establish financial disclosure systems, and what does it take to ensure they are effective?
Thanks a lot, Ivana. Thanks for having us. It's always a pleasure to be here. Well, we all know that FD, financial disclosures, are on the top of the agenda of anti-corruption summit or conferences around the world. But we practitioners, facing a true lack of auditing and return on experiences of what has been doing for the last decades in that perspective. So it's always a pleasure to share our story with us and to hear more from you maybe later. Why? Your first question. Why? Well, of course, the motto here is transparency. Around the globe, all around the globe, citizens demand more transparency to their political system, to their public sector. The transparency is the first goal, first motto we want to achieve with those financial disclosure or COI, conflict of interest disclosures. But for me, as a former public prosecutor and as a practitioner, it is a key and central element to tackle corruption. Because for a public prosecutor, when you bring a case in front of judges, in front of courts, you have to bring with you a lot of evidence, a lot of piece of evidence to show judges the corruption scheme, the corruption links between people, organizations, companies, and corporations, for instance. And it's quite difficult. But it's much more easier with false declaration to prosecute and to get conviction about that. And today, in the newspapers in Paris, there is a press release from the Paris court about a case we transmitted to the Paris Public Prosecution Office many years ago. And that former MP has been convicted to 5 years in prison, pretty high conviction, but for tax fraud and for false declaration to the high authority in France, because the public prosecutor failed to bring enough evidence about the corruption behind the false declaration. So for me, it's an essential element to tackle corruption. That's why it's very important, in my opinion, that countries go in that direction to adopt and to implement effective FD system. how can we make it more effective? Well, when we started with nothing, because the previous commission, Transparency Commission in France, was not able to tackle that issue. No conviction during the last decades, nothing, almost nothing. So very bad, we have bad reviews in international reports. And so in 2014, we made a huge change, massive change in the legislation. I don't want to go into details because, but I will feel free to ask about that. Sorry for that. If you want more details later. How did we make it? First, who is in charge? So we hire and recruit young professionals in tax and in IT systems, and we made them good management in terms of incentives. So we incentive them if they bring me and the board good and robust cases about false declaration. That's the very first point. Second issue, what to declare. There you will face the size matters. There is the size matter of the fillers. So you need, we adopt a very narrow set. You can have that big set of public officials. In France, we have only 20,000 fillers who are compelled to submit FD declarations. So it's quite narrow because we have almost 7 million of public servants in France. So you see it's very narrow. But so that we are able to tackle and to do in-depth control in their declaration. Those are what are they going to declare? How do they declare? That's the blank form issue there. And nowadays we all know that we can buy with iPhone even real estate or travels. So we have been in the situation to make an IT system, an online, full mandatory online declaration system, and quite user-friendly for our fillers. Otherwise, they won't be able to with comfort, declare their assets or their interest. And it's a full IT system because we created and we launched an home design solution that connect our database with all public database connected to the issue. I mean, tax authority and law enforcement agency to do the data checking process from the data collection to the data release. Those who are able to be public to be online. Sorry to that. And my last point here is that what for? What for? When we started, we want to have the more impact as possible. So we decided, and so far we are doing that in that direction, to make a press release for each file we are transmitted to the Public Prosecution Office, so that public opinion, so that NGO, so that the Coalition of Integrity can bring those piece information and to put pressure to under the public official and to the Parliament to go in the good direction into the anti-corruption strategy. So that's the very third thing. And I want just to conclude, because I have so much to say and so little time here, with a challenge, because we have got some successes in that story for the last 5 or 6 years, but we still have big challenges. And the biggest one is, for sure, the international aspect of the situation. We all know here that we have that fantastic UN Merida Convention for Anti-Corruption, but we don't have any clause or any articles in that convention that make possible for Silviu and I, for instance, to communicate data as we have about our feeders. For instance, if Romanian public officials have some properties in Paris, and if Silviu needs some information, I can give you that very essential piece of information. So here at the IMF, under the UN umbrella, let's think about a new clause or a new article in that UN Merida Convention to help us to tackle the issue.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guillaume. So now, from Guillaume, we're moving on to Silviu, another public official, to tell us, to follow up on these points. And specifically, the question I wanted to ask you, Silviu, is what type of technological tools have you developed to better gather asset declarations, information, and mine it? And also, what are some of the challenges and success stories with financial disclosure in Romania? Here is your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. Hello, everybody. Starting from your questions, what are you about to hear is a short story about how we managed to link the concept of financial disclosure to the concept of prevention of conflicts of interest in public procurement. So public procurement concept is like a planet, which is located very, very close to the asteroid belt, constantly being under the danger of being hit by various rocks. collusion, fragmentation of contracts, overpayment, conflicts of interests, and other corruption deeds. And of course, like in the Armageddon Hollywood blockbuster, it is the duty of the government to protect this planet into being obliterated by these rocks. So, find out that in European Union, 50% of the companies think that public procurement, that corruption is a widespread problem in the public procurement processes. In Romania, in my country, it's even worse. 8 out of 10 companies think the same. And we are not talking about some small contracts, I don't know, initiated by heads of authorities when they are buying pencils or laptops for their employees. In Romania, for example, we are talking about a 15 billion euros market annually. This is my agency budget for the next 4,000 years. Speaking of my agency, I worked for the last 12 years. I worked for this agency, National Integrity Agency, which is the central oversight body of the financial disclosure system. And we have the competency of verifying the content of these disclosures and imposing sanctions. More than that, we can also investigate conflicts of interest, many of them committed by public officials within the circle of the public procurement. So over the last decade, we managed to have a track record of cases, almost 1,000 cases of conflicts of interest, amounting several million, 700 million euros. But hear this, in Romania, legislation on conflicts of interest says the following. Every contract that is signed in a state of conflicts of interest is automatically void, and the parts must be reinstated, meaning that the contracts must be cancelled and the money retrieved to the state budget. So we won almost 90% of these cases, but do you know how much money have we managed to retrieve to the state budget? 0. Perfect, 10 points. 0, because the procedure is very cumbersome and is fragmented between so many agencies. There were good faith contractors, good faith third parties. We built schools, bridges. We cannot demolish them and take the money back. So every time we had what it took, legislation, an institution, and some sanction. But a small sanction for the public official, and that was all. So we didn't have our eyes on the prize, on the money in our case. And then we were hopeless. We were thinking, okay, what to do in order to resolve this issue, to resolve this effectiveness and accountability problem. So, maybe we should shift our eye from the consumed conflicts of interest to the potential conflicts of interest, from sanctioning to prevention. Maybe while taking pills because we are sick, maybe we can hit the gym every once in a while and hope that we can develop better habits. And then in 1 year, we built, with the help of external top contractors, an IT system. And this system does the following. It takes automatically, in automatically fashion, it takes data from the financial declaration, data from the public procurement procedure, electronic procedure, data from company register, and data from police database for personal identification numbers. And all these huge amounts of data are cross-checked every time a public tender is launched by a public authority. Whenever an occurrence of the conflict of interest is imminent, this system raises a flag, a red flag, which we call integrity warning. And this warning is automatically sent to the head of that public institutions where the conflict of interest is imminent. You might ask me, okay, so what does he do in this moment? So he has the possibility of removing the cause of the conflicts of interest. He can remove the bidder, he can remove the member of the evaluation committee, he can remove whatever decision factor in that institution which is causing the conflicts of interest. So what if he refuses? Nothing. We do not do nothing because this system is not a sanctioning one, it's a preventive one. We monitorize, we make the follow-up on this, and after the procedure is closed, if he didn't comply with our recommendation, then we can start an ex officio investigation. So some insights about our figures. The system is alive and kicking from 2 years by now. In 2 years, the system managed to scrutinize more than 37,000 procurement procedures, meaning that there were somewhere around 200,000 contracts that were scrutinized by this eye of the prevent system. During this period, we identified almost 100 cases of potential conflicts of interest where we issued red flags. These cases are amounting around $250 million. In other words, in the absence of this system, $250 million would have been leaked to accounts of the companies held by families of the public officials. So, but these figures are pretty nice, right? But the real outcome is two things. First one, the compliance rate with our integrity warning is somewhere 97%. But the biggest thing, the thing that we are very proud of, is that the number of files that our investigators instruments every year dropped with 52%. 52% less conflicts of interest cases than 2 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Silviu. Those are very interesting figures you're sharing with us and this perspective of prevention and detection. So now we're going to jump to civil society, and we're going to be discussing with Vitaliy. And the question I had for you, Vitaliy, is what are the different ways in which financial disclosures can be used at the domestic and international level, and what has been the impact of the use of asset declarations by civil society in Ukraine?
Hi everyone, I will start with the impact. So for last 3 decades in my country we had 3 revolutions. The last one has costed us 100 people killed in the streets by the police. And for all these 3 times, we as a country, as a nation, did not change the political elite. Each time they just switched one to another. With the help of declaration, last year, we totally re-elect the political elite. 70% of MPs are newly elected and have never ever been in politics before, with any blood, with any revolution. By the research, 75% of population makes it electoral choice considering the information of assets from disclosure of assets. So looking strategically here, this information help our country to achieve the results which cannot be achieved for 3 decades with 3 revolutions. Let's go moving forward. For last 20 years, my country, society of my country, were furiously fight to have the legal law enforcement reform, judiciary reform, anti-corruption reform. And we were not succeed in that. After this declaration, for 3 years been implemented, we almost done every of this reform, or just started doing them. It's a big difference for country to know that political elite, judges and prosecutors are think that they are corrupted, and know that. When you can go to the website, just write the name of officials, the judge you know, the prosecutor you know, your member of parliament from a constituency, and to see how luxury way of life he has, the fancy cars, buildings, all that stuff. It's a huge difference between feeling how much they are corrupted and knowing that. So we as NGO did not even think how powerful this knowledge will be for my country, and it really helps us. Now it's almost impossible in Ukraine for officials to hide its assets. And here I would like to thank so much IMF staff, World Bank staff, our partners from EU and USA. Only with tough love of this institution, we as a nation was able to push this reform. Our political elite was fighting against assets disclosure more furiously than that fought against increasing of pension level, not pension, retirement age. when you start to do this job with disclosure of your assets, it's not only the system that should have information. If you will have the system, you need as a register to be open to check the information. If you will have, and you start to fight for the registers. If you will have the information, you need to have law enforcement in a place who could use the information to bring cases. Then you need to have a courts which can deal with this information. So when you start from the disclosure of the assets of officials, you start to rebuild the whole system to have the result at the end. And it's a good starting point, because it's very hard for politicians or for judges to oppose your efforts to reform them when you just say, okay, guys, of course you are against the reform because you are going to lose your cars and your fancy buildings. It gives you so many advocacy instruments that any other system will give you. And just to, I have 1 more minute, to show how we use this information in anti-money laundering international issue. Could you just switch on the side? I will show you our as NGO, as an ANTAC database of politically exposed persons in Ukraine, and how we fill the information about assets from the open database we've got from state with the disclosures. Could you just switch on the side? So it's not only to have the information into the register owned by the state. You should be able, it should be written in a law that this information should be given in machine-readable format for everyone who would like to have it. Because we as an NGO in Ukraine has built many instruments which will use this data. And I would like to show you just the first one. So it's like a database of politically exposed persons of Ukrainian PEPs, if you know what I'm speaking about. And this database is used by all Ukrainian big banks, and now the biggest global database, WorldCheck, is used in the same base. And each time Ukrainian official became richer, in a day this information appears in our database. In a week it appears in database of WorldCheck. So it means each and every big global bank knows about Ukrainian PEPs everything, about each and every assets. Are we able to show that? No, we are working on that. It's not my fault.
Not mine either.
As NGO activist, as anti-corruption activist, I just would like to give us our experience. It's a great point to start your anti-corruption reform from the side of assets disclosure system. And I think it's a good effort from IMF and World Bank side to put this agenda into your memorandum, especially when you have land on the ground. Because it helps activists and journalists and thinking part of the society to show you as a good guys. So IMF and World Bank is not only the guy who is going to increase pension age, retirement age. These are the guys who are fighting for more transparency for your taxation. Could we? I can speak like in 4 hours here.
What we can do is maybe we can jump to Emilia. Thank you so much, Vitaliy, because what you're saying is really, really important. Sorry we couldn't visualize also what you were describing. I've seen the website, it's amazing. And I know WorldCheck also uses it. So maybe we can go back to that point when we fix the technological issues. But in the meantime, let's jump to Emilia. Emilia, the question I wanted to ask you this time is, what challenges you see that are faced and what are the main lessons learned in terms of the implementation of asset declarations, and what do you see as the future of financial disclosure?
Sure. But before answering your question, I would like to ask a question to our audience. And is, have you ever wondered why public officials, regardless their seniority, sometimes seems wealthier when they leave their office, and how we can address and tackle this? There is a very simple way of doing this, and it's designing and implementing an asset declaration system. And please take into account that I'm talking about asset declaration system and not only about asset declarations. Because from our point of view, it's not enough having a law in place where public officials only submit asset declaration, but we do need to have a whole system. And basically, in our experience, we have been able to identify 6 major challenges. There are basically administration, compliance, coverage, resources, transparency, and political support. As I don't have a lot of time, I will focus this time on transparency, and not because I work for Transparency International, but because I do believe that it's something key. In many countries, we have seen that we have laws that public officials submit their asset declaration, but you know that at civil society, we are really curious, and we always want to get access and see the information that is there. And sometimes that is not the case. Why? Because the asset declarations are not publicly available. And this, for us, and when I say us, I'm not only speaking as a civil society representative, but also as a citizen that is really concerned about corruption, is something key. We do need to make sure that this is publicly available. There is no other way in which civil society journalists can be actively engaged if we don't have access to this information. And I want to be clear in the fact that we are not asking we want to see everything public, because of course that we know that when we talk about access to public information, we always should take into account privacy issues. But that doesn't mean that anything should be public. And I want to be really clear on this, because in some countries, this is a major issue. Another point that I would like to address is coverage. There is a lot of debate whether, should only the public official declare their asset, or should also their family declare it? The country where I come from, I come from Argentina, there are a lot of issues going around about this, and in fact, the organization I used to work for, our local chapter in Argentina, Poder Ciudadano, did an amazing job going to court regarding this issue, because at some point, the people, like spouse, daughters, sons of the official, said, okay, we can declare, but this is not going to be public. And that was really an issue, because if we really want to be transparent and we really want to tackle corruption, we need to know also all the relative people and not the public official. So I believe that these are the 6 major challenges that we identify. And regarding the future, and we are at the iLab, I do believe that technology can play a key role. I don't want to say that technology is going to solve everything, because that's not true, and it also depends how we use technology, if it can really tackle corruption or help the corrupt people to be even more corrupt. But when it comes to asset declaration, Vitaliy was saying, for instance, everything should be in machine-readable format. And yes, of course, and here technology can play a key role. Imagine it would be much more easy, for instance, if we need to submit everything, not writing like this, like I have a horrible handwriting, probably nobody's going to understand what I'm saying, if we could really use technology. Of course, that depending the country, there are some challenges when it comes to technology, because let's be honest, in order to have a technology system in place, you need to have a lot of resources, and not only financial resources, but also human resources. And this is not only just to put the system in place, but also then while you are implementing it. I'm running out of time, so just to wrap up, I would say there are a lot of challenges instead in place. We have some solutions. Technology can play a key role. But if we really want to tackle corruption, countries, international organizations should be really serious about integrity and about asset declaration systems. There is no other way in which you can tackle corruption if you don't have an asset declaration system in place. As you have said when you started this session, asset declarations can help with issues such as beneficial ownership transparency, conflict of interest, and I do believe that it's great that the IMF is hosting this session. I have been attending to annuals and spring meetings for almost 3 years, and I think that is the first time ever that I'm seeing the IMF doing a public event about asset declaration, so I think that that is really great.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Thank you very much, all of you. So I don't think we can see the website yet, so what I will do is I will quickly try to recap. Oh, we have the website. Do you want to explain it very quickly? Oh.
Screen, yeah. Could you scroll a bit down? So it's a PEP, that's a former ex-general prosecutor of Ukraine, and you can see this all this data, monetary assets, and for all the years, And you can scroll down. So we have real estate, we have presence of the guy, we have all his bank accounts information, not the numbers of money on that bank accounts, not the numbers itself. So, and each time this information changes, the database changes, and the world check gets that information. So it's become very easy for a bank to do the due diligence on Ukrainian PEPs, because all the information is on a website, can be downloaded from IP from our website, and we've got this information from the register of the official assets. So that's it. And we have the information about their spouse, daughters, sons, and all their assets because of the law. I think Ukraine was the last one from those countries who established the system, and we have really good system.
Thank you.
It really helps.
Thank you, Vitaliy. So I don't want to do too much of a recap because I think so many important yes?
You should check it out. PEP or GUA?
Yeah, I think it's up there.
Okay, thank you.
You can see it in the browser. So it's hard for me to recap everything they said because they touched on so many important topics and so many important issues related to financial disclosure. Just to mention very quickly some of them, the fact that we're talking about a system is just not about a law, it's about something that has different steps. And also the fact that financial disclosure alone, it doesn't work alone. It doesn't work in a vacuum. We need the prevention side, we need the prosecution, we need a lot of we need the money laundering authorities, we need the financial intelligence units. This doesn't work in a vacuum. I think those were 2 points that were said. Moving on to the specifics of financial disclosure, comprehensive, including information on family members, on beneficial ownership, not only what the public official owns, also what they indirectly own or have separated themselves from. The use of technology and how this can really help and with impactful amounts of money in the table. Public access, I think Emilia did a very compelling case on that. The issue of verification of the information, false information, and how having false information can be a first step when you have very complex corruption schemes. How can it get you to an intermediate outcome if you don't manage to prove the bigger scheme that is behind. Information sharing within relevant agencies at the international level also mentioned. Again, so many topics, but I would like to open the floor now to questions. I don't remember how much time we have. I think it's about 7 minutes or 10. So who would like to go first? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Murray. I'm a professor at Columbia University, and I advise governments on their national anti-corruption strategies. I have what I think is a basic question for you, and this will have immediate impact because I am currently advising a government that's trying to move from a manual to an electronic system for asset declarations. So it sounds like both France, Romania, and Ukraine have created a model for doing this, including linkages to all the different international databases. Is there one now best practice? Is there one way of doing this? That, I mean, I think each of you probably could guide this process for this government, but I'm just wondering if there's a universal sort of best practice here.
Before you answer, I would like to maybe pick 2 or 3 more so that we can have a full set. Anyone else?
I'm Sed Ogada from the IMF legal department. So interested in the French system. You said that you have about 20,000 people that are subject to declarations. And I was just wondering, what is the criteria? Is it the seniority of the public official? Is it that there are some offices that are more sensitive in terms of maybe they handle a lot of money, or is it a mixture of both?
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Lisa Bansali, professor at Georgetown Law School. You mentioned the issue of people leaving public office, and it's interesting to see how much money they go out with. As part of the verification process in asset declarations, to what extent is there a chance to sort of, as they say, follow the money? In other words, follow a PEP once he or she leaves public office. In other words, for a period of time that they are a private official, or a private person rather, not a public official.
So maybe we can start with these 3 questions. I don't know in which order you want to go. We have 3 very interesting questions on the good system, the models, who declares how you select it, and the verification. Oh, you have your mic, sorry.
Yeah, just to deal with the last question about revolving doors. Actually, authority in France has set up very diverse missions, because we do asset declaration, conflict of interest declaration, but we also do revolving doors checking. For all public officials are also embedded in the declaration system. It means all ministers, all top non-elected officials, for instance. So we are following not the money, we're following the professional trajectory career. I mean, so that's one of the purposes I want to say. And for you, Mr. Director, the criteria. You have 20,000 people. The law provides the criteria, of course. So we have both elected and non-elected officials. And the criteria upon the law is based on corruption risk analysis, sorry. So yes, most sensitive public position, non-elected, are embedded. For instance, those who are dealing with public procurements are compelled to declare their asset as well as their conflict of interest declarations.
Anyone else like to?
I would respond to your question because it's very, very interesting. So the whole thing with the systems of assets declarations is that we are about to leave the middle age, the dark age of this issue. You know, because starting with Merida Convention from 2003, lots of countries started to embark into adopting financial declaration systems for public officials, but like Ivana said, they only ticked the box. And there is no jurisprudence on that. There is no history on financial declaration systems. So the literature, the doctrine is now being created. A small part Ukraine, a small part Romania, France, Argentina, and so many examples. The most important thing is that there is no silver bullet to this. Every system that is designed for a certain country must fit their own needs. I'm going to give you a short example. I was with the Council of Europe in Jordan, and they are trying to adopt this financial declaration system and to make it sort of efficient. And I was going to make for them some recommendation on how to improve their system. And they said, Mr. Popa, you can give us anything, but have in mind that we do not want declarations to be transparent, because here we have a tradition in that perspective. So when you make this recommendation, you have to take into account this type of things. You know, maybe not all the things at once, but having a step-by-step approach. Thank you.
In my country, it was a deep tradition not to show assets for everyone except of the family, especially when you're a public official. So guys, just don't care about traditions. If you will not have the information publicly available, better in machine data format, you don't need these declarations at all. Answering to your question, if not mistaken, due to the FAB standard, official stays PEP for 3 years after leaving the office. Even after that, we did not take the guy from our database. We just make a label on that. So he was a PEP, now he's not, but take into consideration. That's it. For best model, I don't know other country, but in Ukraine, because of the information can be downloaded in machine reading format, it really creates the space for everyone who wants to, banks, business, NGO sector, to build the instruments which is very narrowly focused, like conflict of interest in procurement. Or it's much more interesting to have this instrument when we're speaking about conflict of interest in local council, local council, when they're making decision on land, on property, decision on property for their own interest or interest of their entity. And when you have this data opened, you can take sources from the public disclosure system, you can take information from legal entity register, and then just to connect them. And it's not rocket science, it can be done very easily by the small amount of programmers. So I think that key point here is to have this information in data, in computer reading format. Because if you don't have data,
just very short to your point, at Transparency International, we developed a specific paper about asset declaration and technology a few years ago that I think that is going to be super useful. And I will be happy to share with you because there are some key recommendations about kind of more the positive side of technology and also some of the challenges that countries might face. Regarding your question about how we can follow the money, and I believe that is really important, completely support your point about revolving doors. And also there are some, like people saying, well, why don't we ask also to public officials that have already left their position to submit asset declaration for some period of time after they have left, like their official position, so that we can track and see whether if there is some increase in their patrimony or not. And linked to that, I believe that is also, we are talking of a system, and also if we really want to tackle corruption, we should take into account other issues such as, for instance, beneficial ownership transparency. That is something that many people use to hide their resources, and as Ivana has pointed, asset declarations can really help to move this agenda forward.
If we have more time for questions? Yes.
You have mentioned one of the difficulties is the relative. How far could you go with the relative? Next of kin, I could give it on relative issues. I could go beyond, next of kin to friends. How would you track that? Do you have any statistic worldwide, the amount of corruption in value terms? Last but not least, some of the countries, they have secret, on the whatever, from the banking sector, whatever. So how could you deal with these challenges when a country has, secrets, limits on the, accounts or whatever?
So like before, we're going to take 2 or 3. There's many.
Thank you, and thanks for the interesting presentation. My name is Dominic Trick with Oliver Wyman. My question is the following. I know that many public institutions at the institutional level have codes of conduct that mandate disclosure of assets or financial transactions and so on. So I was wondering how the sort of a national level financial disclosure system interacts with institution-specific disclosure and code of conduct practices. Is this duplicative? Does that get integrated? Does it replace it over time, etc.?
Marcus Fogart, Wolfsburg Group. If you had one ask of the IMF and the ability to put things in covenant, we heard there, and I would agree entirely, that public ability to see those disclosure forms is top of my list. What else would you ask of them to put in the covenants on a go-forward basis?
I think there was one more, and then we'll respond.
Kareem Naqshbandi, Compliance Services. What is your methodology for validating information that's on disclosures? Thank you.
Want to go ahead?
I will start because I'm the only one without a pen. I cannot remember all the questions, but I will start in the reverse order. So our methodology when we are investigating the content of this disclosure is provided by the law. And the law says that we have access to any kind of information provided by public authorities or private companies or physical persons or anyone. And this information is cross-checked with the data filled in the declaration. We managed to identify several hundreds of these cases where persons forget to submit some of the cars or jewelries or things like that. But the most impact of our investigations have those on conflicts of interest, consumed conflicts of interest, breaching the incompatibility regime, and on unjustified assets, which is not illicit but unjustified. The difference between what you've earned and what you've spent during your mandate. The problem with the codes of conduct in this perspective is that they are ineffective. They are zero from our point of view, because we do not have a discipline in following some moral rules and things like that. You know, in Romania, the assets declarations were implemented in 1996, but they weren't transparent. They were kept under sealed envelopes. Nobody knew nothing about conflicts of interest, about things like that. After we were established, we somehow managed to impose a discipline in making your assets transparent, in disclosing your assets, in following some integrity rules. And now, 10 years after we were established, we are in the position where persons, before they take an office, they come to us and ask us, look, I have 2 companies. Do I have to renounce the position of shareholder? How do I fill in these declarations? What are the legal challenges for conflicts of interest? And many of them, what we observed, is that they renounce to take offices because they wouldn't want to renounce at their private capacities. The cost of corruption, even the IMF said some years ago, $2 trillion every year, and there are some technical papers in this perspective.
There was one, maybe before you finalize, there was one about what would be your ask in terms of what would you think it would be good to have in an asset declaration system aside from public access?
Aside from public access, it's very important to have some dissuasive sanctions. Without sanctions, nobody will follow this only based on codes of conduct and moral thing. No. So sanctions. After that, you have to have a central oversight body, which has to be independent one and autonomous to conduct their own investigations. The last part of the cake is to try to have as much support as you can from the media and civil society, because you are running on thin ice. You know, anti-corruption is not a domain very loved by officials.
If I may, just to add a very few about what Silviu said, to follow the money, and due to the fact that we don't have this international convention regarding our businesses, it's key that our agencies are connected to their national tax authorities, law enforcement agencies, as well as FIU, so that the case that I mentioned during my presentation, the MPs, the former MPs that have been convicted today to 5 years, we've got the full picture of his assets, even though most of it was in shell companies, were in the Caribbean or in Morocco, for instance, thanks to the tax administration network, thanks to the huge work that has been done since the financial crisis in 2008, the OECD progress and so on. Thanks to that, our French tax authority gave us a key piece of information that has been allowed us to follow the money of that guy. That's central.
What I would request to the IMF, I have been requesting a lot of things about anti-corruption, so now I have one more thing to request. Of course that we want to see asset declarations publicly available, but I believe that my key ask would be to understand that we are really talking about a system and not only about having a law. It's really important to make sure that that law is implemented. Totally support your point about sanctions. That is what in the 6 challenges that I say, I mention it as compliance, because what we see, if there is no sanction, then a lot of public officials they decide not to submit and then nothing happens. And this, depending the country, it can be like a sanction or maybe saying, hey, look, this is great, all these people have submitted their asset declarations, depend what the country wants to do. But yes, have something in place. We do believe that that is key. And also when it comes to an oversight authority, it really needs to be independent. It really needs to have staff that they know how to deal with this. It really needs to have resources. If not, the system is never going to be in place.
Okay, I have microphone. It's not enough to have criminal liability of false statement in e-declaration. You should also have criminal liability of illicit enrichment. So if you will not have this criminal liability of illicit enrichment, the officials will write all his assets in your declaration, all these fancy cars and buildings, so what? He will not lie you about the assets he had, but how are you going to punish them for these assets? So it's crucial for system not only to have the criminal liability for false statement in e-declaration system, e-declaration, I told, because my country is e-declaration system, but to have this criminal liability on illicit enrichment. And here, IMF, thank you so much for fighting this criminal liability in my country.
I think thank you. I think we didn't answer to two of the questions of the gentleman at the beginning regarding the family members and how far you go into how many family members, how extensive into family members. I think that was one of your questions. And also the issue of bank secrecy, especially related, I guess, with verification and supporting AML.
In my country, it's written into the law that officials should write in each asset he has influence in, without concerning the legal connection and legal the nature of legal of these relationships. So it doesn't matter whom are you write your assets for, your mother-in-law, your secretary, or offshore somewhere in Caribbean. If you have this, you should write it into your declaration, because if you will not, the investigation agency will punish you for that. That's the first step. The second step is written into the law that you should write in each assets of those one who lives with you. So if your kids lives with you in one flat, in one building, you should write their assets. If they are not, up to them. In my country, they always hide the declarations, the assets on their spouse, but who are not officially married. So that was the case to write such kind of amendment into the law. So that's the way. It's crucial to have this amendment that you should write in each assets, not considering the way the legal connection with you and relationships. Yeah, thank you, with these assets and you. So we are doing it that way.
When we are talking about conflicts of interest, we can go up to second-degree relatives when investigating. When we are investigating unjustified assets, we also focus not only on the public officials' patrimony, but also we extend the verification to its spouse and the dependent children. So from this point of view, our mandate is very, very limited. Only being an administrative institution, we are very limited in verifying third parties or other types of relationship like friends and things like that. This is the bad part. The good part is that we do not, the bank secrecy is not opposable to us. So we can ask information from accounts from the banks, and they have to be sent to us in no more than 30 days. So this was a huge thing for us in this perspective. And I have to mention one thing I want to underline, is that these institutions are all administrative, because not every breach of the moral rules or the codes of conduct are not necessarily penal one, criminal. Mm-hmm. Many of them are breaching of integrity rules. So using administrative tools proves to be more successful and more efficient in ways to have some setbacks, to have some results in this perspective.
I think we have run out of time, unfortunately. I see more hands handing, but we know there's going to be the cocktail later on, and they're all going to be here, so you can continue to ask questions. In the meantime, thank you so much to the four of you for this interesting discussion, and to everyone for staying.